Sky. It's like not true. I made that up. I was just like 9. And then like it was like years later, I was like in a bar in New York and someone came up to me and they were like, Sky. And I was like, what? And they were like, Sky. Like we went to school together. And I was like,
Stop.
I don't even remember being that person, which is ironic now because if you know anything about me, like as an artist, like you're like that tracks. Right. Like you constantly look and seem and act like different, you know.
But that's kind of like fun and tough as a kid to be like, you're constantly not having to have this like stable foundation around you of like, I went to the same fucking school from like kindergarten to 8th grade, so like we all knew each other's parents and we all knew each other's shit, which has its pros and cons. But like constantly moving, I feel like you can reinvent yourself, but you also, I feel like, aren't really seen then.
No, definitely not. Yeah, you're just like, there's like fragments of you out in the world, just like these little whispers of a person who's like barely even formed. Like my manager, Anthony, has a tattoo on his arm, and it's a tattoo of his childhood home. And he was like, yeah, this is like a drawing of my childhood home. And I was like, bitch, if you asked me what my childhood home was, I can't think of one because like I had so many. Like I can't picture like a childhood home. I lived in like 8 houses, like apartments, like you know what I mean?
You couldn't even like draw something.
I mean, I would have to, if I had to pick one that was like my childhood home, like maybe the house I lived in when I was in high school, but that's not really childhood.
No.
You know what I mean? It was like, I lived in so many different apartments. I lived in like Florham Park. I lived in Linden. I lived in Clark. I lived in like Sussex. I just lived in so many different places in all these like little apartments, and they're all just kind of this amorphous goo of like a bedroom, and I'm like in there with my little brother, and then there's like the kitchen, and then like, you know, like the apartment complexes, they all like blend into like one, like when I picture it, kind of.
I'm interested to get your take on this. Like, what do you think is the difference between like hyper independence versus loneliness?
I think it's whether it's forced or it's a choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the difference. I think like if you're choosing to be hyper independent because it's like it's better for you and like you function, you know, better in that way, versus if you're forced into hyper independence because you're not trusting or you have like an attachment issue or like, you know, you're you put a lot of a lot of pressure on yourself to succeed or to accomplish. That's kind of that like loneliness, like that solitude. Like,
would you say you were lonely as a kid?
Oh my God, yeah. I was so lonely. I'm still lonely. I'm like, you know, loneliness is like when it affects you on, you know, I feel like there's like clinical loneliness, you know, it's like there's being sad because something happened, and then there's like obviously like depression, which is like, you know, it's clinical. I feel like there's a version of that with loneliness, you know, where it's like you're lonely because people aren't around and you have no one to hang out with, or you're lonely because you're going through something singular. Then there's like deep, like carnal loneliness. And I think that I've definitely felt that way for like a lot of my life. And it's hard to fix, you know. It's like it's hard to get around that, especially if you become comfortable in it, you know.
Well, and I feel like what you're sharing too about your life, which I appreciate you sharing all of this, just to pause for a second,
I feel like I'm being so dark.
No, you're not.
A fun podcast. No. Like, I was lonely as a kid. Like,
let me just say, like, this is the shit that I think, like, when we now like listen to your music, it even adds like more context. And like, in my opinion, like I feel, not in a creepy way, but like I feel closer to you now because I'm like, oh fuck, like so many people are like, preach, yes, same, fuck, same. Like you talking about your childhood, I think that when people are listening to your music, it is kind of helpful to know, like, no wonder you are lonely, because like you came from this household environment that you had to become lonely because you constantly were just like surviving alone. And like I think that happens a lot of times when there are volatile or abusive situations at home, like if there's multiple people getting abused, you can't even connect in the moment over it because you're just surviving.
Totally.
And then you talking with your mom later on down the line, like, of course you wish you guys could have bonded over or talked about it when you were that young, but you couldn't because you didn't have the tools, either of you, to be like, this is happening. Sometimes, a lot of times it takes getting out to be able to talk about shit.
And it's generational. You know what I mean? Like I always say, it's like for a lot of us, our parents were in the generation of survival. We're the first with the luxury of existential thought. You know what I mean? Like they didn't have the luxury to like be like putting thought into, you know, their existence or like the roles and dynamics at play or like, you know, the reasons why they're doing something. Like it was mostly just like surviving, you know?
I'm really interested to talk about this high school glow up that you had because I could not relate more to something. I know that you've mentioned in the past you were kind of like insecure and unnoticed, and then going into sophomore year of high school, you had this glow up. Can you talk to me about that time of your life?
Call Her Daddy is brought to you by Sephora. Daddy Gang, holiday shopping season is here. I love it, but I'm going to keep it real. It can be very overwhelming trying to find the right gifts for everybody on your list. I know I get stressed. I know I procrastinate, okay? But here is some advice. Don't overthink it. Just go to Sephora. You know, we got to keep it simple. We got to keep it to the facts, Daddy Gang. Does anyone on your list have a face? I am guessing yes. Give them something for that. Do they have skin? Quality skincare products are always a hit. A nose, maybe grab the best fragrance or a little nose contour, okay? The best in makeup, skincare, hair care, and fragrance are always at Sephora, not to mention exclusive gift sets too. You cannot go wrong with Sephora, Daddy Gang. So this holiday, don't overthink it. Give something beautiful from Sephora.
Going into sophomore year of high school, you had this glow up. Can you talk to me about that time of your life?
I was like really underdeveloped.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I was like really skinny. I like didn't hit puberty until like a lot later. And I was like super nerdy. I had the glasses and like, you know, I was like, I was just like a geek. And then, you know, I hit puberty and like I came back and all of a sudden I had like huge tits and like, you know, I got contacts and like I also kind of like that was where I sort of entered my like I kind of entered my villain era like when I was like 15 where I was like tired of being nerdy and geeky and I was like fuck you guys, like I actually have really cool interests and I hang out with adults, like which is not good. That's like a whole other separate bad thing, but
we'll
like
get there.
yeah, but I felt very like, you know, I felt very like emboldened by that and it was just like at school like I don't know, like my coping mechanism of like not getting along with the kids I went to school with or not like really fitting in and having a friend group was by telling myself it didn't matter because I had like cooler, more interesting friends and people I knew, most of whom were just like online, like didn't really hang out with them in real life. And I was like, you know, we're talking about like, you know, intellectual things and like whatever else. But yeah, I definitely, I feel like everything really changed really fast for me. And I went from someone who was like, who looked like a nerdy 10-year-old when I was 15 to like someone who was getting like tons of unwanted like sexual attention. And I was like, what the fuck?
How did having like, because I experienced a similar thing of like overnight going through puberty and being like, no, like the same guy that's like bullying the fucking shit out of me is now like wanting to like take me on a date. And I'm like, hold on, pause, you fucking piece of shit. Like nothing changed except my looks. And yet now you're into me. Like how did that impact the way that you like felt about yourself?
I think it did in like a lot of different ways. The first was I had to like differentiate, you know, between what attention was like kindness and what wasn't, because my first instinct is I was like, oh, people are being really nice to me now, and I just missed the agenda completely. And like that was really hard to navigate because I didn't have a lot of experience with that, and it took me a long time to learn like if someone is like giving you that kind of attention, you're not obligated to return it. But I was really afraid of like making people mad or making people not like me, and like, you know, on like the simplest level, it's like a guy will be like an asshole to you if you are kind of if you reject him.
Yes.
And then on the worst version of it, there's violence. You know what I mean? So it was kind of like I had to learn how to navigate, like, I am not obligated to pursuit of thing.
Because when you all this value, I remember when that happened to me, I felt at first so excited, like kind of like you're talking about, there's that validation. But underneath it, I think when I was alone, I had some like anger because I was like,
Totally.
What, like, is it, it's so surface level. Like I've been the same person the whole time, but you guys like didn't give me any fucking attention until I had tits and an ass. And like,
that's when you have to start doing the would you have been nice to me before? And if the answer is no, then bye.
Bye. It's really confusing.
Yeah.
You said once that you thought your sexiness was a superpower, kind of like we're talking about.
Yeah.
And made it so no one could hurt you and you would enter these rooms just like
for sure.
feeling that confidence.
Yeah, I definitely wielded sexual power as like a, you know, I don't know, like as a tool of acquisition, you know, like I definitely used it in certain circumstances because it was kind of all that I had.
Can you give me an example?
Well, like, you know, if you're in a room full of people, especially men, you know, and in this business, as I was starting my business and I was learning how to navigate the industry, it's not just like I write songs and like, oh, I have to build a business. You know, you're in a room full of people who are more experienced than you, they're older than you, they're richer than you, they're very often men, white men, you know, and at the time I started out by trying to be like, look how smart I am and look how much I know. And it was kind of like, okay. And I was like, well, that's not working. Okay. And then at a certain time, I think in the beginning, I kind of figured out like, I can make all of these like really smart men dumb instantly if I'm just hot, you know? Like it's so crazy how fast they become stupid. Like they have so much power over you in the moment where you're like, oh, the experience, the money, the power, the whatever. And then you have this one little magic trick in your pocket where you can just be like, really? And all of a sudden that guy is like, And you're like, oh God, that was so easy. It's like, why wouldn't you use it if you have it then?
And I think so many people can relate to this. Like, I do think, using that part of us that is so sexualized and leaning into it, you can feel this like great energy from it. And it's like
until it feels gross though, until it gets gross.
And it feels gross pretty fast, I feel like. And I think like a lot of conversation I always see online, like I know Emily Ratajkowski has like talked a lot about it of like there's this weird fucking thing where you know you can use it to an advantage, but then you also have to like have some ability to like navigate for yourself what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. Like when do you think, if you have like a memory that you were like, oh, I'm taking it too far, this actually is like I'm not feeling chill about this?
I mean, there's been like a couple times. There's definitely like some times where like I was, you know, I was like out with like some collaborators and it was like late and like someone was just like, we were kind of like playfully flirting in a way that was like seemed really harmless. And then they got like really drunk and they just started kind of like touching me like in public, and I was like, whoa. But at the time, you know, it's like, and I was younger then, but it was like, you don't want to cause a scene, you don't want to like, you know, there's other people there, you don't want them to see you freak out, and then they don't want to work with you because they think you're a drama queen and like whatever else. And you know, and these are all, like I said, younger minded belief systems of mine that have obviously since changed now that I'm older. But like, it was those kind of things where I was like, this is not worth it. You know, it's becoming unsafe, and I don't want, you know, I don't want this to seem like I'm signing some sort of invisible contract where I'm promising something to someone. You know?
And I think the concept of like being a young person in a situation where there's a power dynamic, like it's such this like hard thing to explain until you're in those situations where you referenced it earlier of like, I didn't want to make this person upset and I didn't want it to escalate where it could literally get to the point where it goes like violent. So you kind of just like appease the situation. And I think that is where it can get really scary, and you keep just like, we just can appease people and like make it be like, oh no, everything's fine. And it's like, but then you go home and you feel like gross and shitty.
That with you. I had like a really strange situation a couple years ago. I mean, I guess it was quite a long time ago. But I was out and I was with this executive, like this really powerful executive who works in music in some capacity. And I'd been going out and like hanging out with him and like some other people at the company, and like, you know, we were working together, and like everything was like really fine. Like it was very just like celebratory, and like there was a lot of like industry talk. I didn't feel weird about it at all. And I like had like my two managers with me who were kind of like older guys, and like I never felt like unsafe or anything. We were out one night and like he was like, oh, like I want to send a photo to like my niece of us together or something like that. And I was like, okay. And I like took out my phone. I took like a selfie of the two of us, and I handed him my phone, and I was like, text it to yourself, I have to pee. And then I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, he like handed me my phone like this, and I saw he was like going through my nudes on my phone.
What is wrong with people?
And I like sat down and I was like, actually didn't even know what to do. I was just like frozen. I was like, did I just imagine that? Was that an accident? Like, did the phone like scroll up? Like what the heck just happened? And then I was like, did he text them to himself and then delete the messages? Like, I don't even know where these are now. Like, I was just like, I was like frozen, and I was like, that's so crazy that like I'm in this situation where like I have so much power. I have a bodyguard. Like I have a bodyguard, and I have, you know, all the leverage in the world, and I'm in this like exclusive space in this like VIP, like, you know, I've reached the ranks of like, oh, I am protected or like whatever else it may be. And then this invasive thing just happens like on a whim, and I was like, oh my God. It made me feel, I felt like it regressed me so much. Like it made me feel, I went from being like, yeah, I'm like fucking hot shit and I'm one of the big players. And like, and then I sat down, and when that happened in that moment, I was like, you're nothing. You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. You're still just like that fucking girl who's like getting, you know, taken advantage of, or like men are talking about you behind your back, or you're some sort of like collateral. I was like, you're nothing. It was so demoralizing.
It's so...
And so many worse things have happened to me than that, but that one stuck out for me.
Yeah. It's like, I think, and you technically, like, we revert to that, like, little child of, like, men ruling the world, and then, like, we were just talking about, and you in that moment, like, no, of course, and people would be like, why didn't you just say something? It's like, you don't get it until you're fucking in those moments where it's like, there is kind of nothing to say, but even if you said something, then you're the crazy bitch that it's like, oh, and then someone calls you a slut, because then what do you mean? What are you talking about? Your nudes? You take nude? Like, they can turn it so fucking fast on you.
Also, it's like, are you like a bad bitch businesswoman? That's the other thing is like, at what point, you know, where is the line between
I don't think anyone moments knows what to highest of powered people, like, and I think that's why this is a really interesting conversation, because it's like you're so something and made a scene, then you're just like, oh, she's like the crazy bitch, like no one work with her anymore, she like makes stuff up, and she like uses her like sexual being parts of herself as like a way to like get people in trouble. We don't touch her anymore, like no
she's
one
like a black widow, she'll flirt with you and then she'll like stare. I'm like, whoa, okay.
And men don't have that experience, can talk about it, but also is not like above it, where you're like, fuck, thank you, we don't have the answer to any of this.
No, also that's the thing, people look to us and they're like, so what do you do in those situations? Because they're like, oh, thank you for sharing, so what's the solution? And you're like, I don't know. I'm still figuring that out. I mean, like, I'm still figuring out so many things. Like, I even now, like, you know, I like, where are the lines, you know? Like, sometimes it's just like, if someone's being like a little overly friendly, it's hard sometimes to be like, okay, is it like because they're excited to talk to me, or is it because they're like, they don't understand social cues, or like